Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome back Jess Abilieto, General Manager Mexico at Arrive Logistics. Welcome back to the show, Jess.
Thanks for having me back, Mary. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited as well. Mostly because I'm gonna throw you out as our cross-border gal. You are the US Mexico cross-border number one draft pick, in my opinion.
I dig it. I like it.
So, kind of jumping into that same theme, what are some of because there's obviously, the end of last year, everyone was talking about nearshoring, and now tariffs have taken over the main form of converse or the main topic of conversation. But ultimately, a lot of emphasis still comes down to what's happening with cross border relations, mostly between the US and Mexico. So, what are some of those trends that you guys are seeing right now in that cross border freight?
Yeah, I think overall, we're continuing to see increased volumes. Nearshoring is not slowing down. But if we're talking about 2025 specifically, there was definitely some impact of the tariffs, as you mentioned, right? So we saw a pull forward of volume in Q1. Uh, I think March was the largest trade month between the US and Mexico, almost 78 billion in trade flowing between the two countries in March. But then with that came, a little bit of a pullback in the second quarter. So overall crossings were down in May by 1%. I think specifically in Laredo, crossings were down by 6% since the tariffs went live. So that's a little bit of the trends on the supply side. I'm sorry, on the demand side. But on the supply side, I think more recently we're seeing, more tightening of capacity with, potentially these English proficiency requirements. They went into effect a couple weeks ago. And so with that, I think we're still trying to understand what the overall impact is. We can see, with our carrier base that there have been instances where, drivers are getting put out of service, but at the same time, I think that carriers are really planning, and it's been within carriers' programs to have their carriers be trained and make sure that they're English proficient. So, if anything, if we see an impact, I think we could potentially see carriers being really strategic on who they assign to certain routes, or maybe some of that driver capacity going back into Mexico, which would actually solve some of the shortages that we see on the Mexico side. So I think overall, those are some of the trends that I've seen so far this year.
I gotta say, those trends are pretty right in line with kind of what I've seen and what I've kind of heard anecdotally is that, especially in regards to the English language proficiency, everyone's just kind of like, we're gonna wait and see what potential impacts this has, if it has any. And then also, I do kind of like the opportunity that it gives carriers to almost kind of restructure their how they assign drivers to things of, that if you're having someone handle a cross-border freight or do that move into the US more, well, you can put certain people on that. And then you can also kind of it almost feels like you can match up preferences to what drivers want and what they're good at better than just kind of saying anyone can do these. It really kind of matches those niches up a little bit better and hopefully creates more opportunities for drivers that are kind of looking to maybe get out of the longer miles or have more of a routine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that we've also heard is that there's going to be variance across states where, there are some states that are saying, this is not something that we're going to really be strict on, and then others that are really going to enforce a little bit more. So to your point, it's been a little bit of a wait and see, and I think we'll see the impact in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back with you on that one in a couple months and see how we're doing. But I guess when it comes to that, the demand that you were saying, have you guys seen the increase in has there been an increase in volumes that are crossing at the border? Obviously, you just said that we had a record-setting month in March, but was it March or May? I get those months mixed up.
March, yeah, it was
March,
March.
that's right, because the May data is not completely out yet. But how it's I guess if you're looking at that May snapshot or March snapshot and then go back to maybe 2 years ago or even a year ago, are the volumes kind of staying consistent or is it just continuing to rise?
Volumes are continuing to rise. And so I think it was in 2023 that, Mexico was for the first time the US's largest trade partner. And we saw that last year. We're going to see it this year. And so I think from a volume perspective, we're going to continue to see those volumes rise. I know there's some uncertainty with the tariffs, but I think those are very much so in the short term. But the long term impact is that nearshoring and all the investments that have been made, those volumes are coming online. Shortly after the pandemic is when those investments were made, and they're continuing to be made. And so I'm excited. It's a very exciting time to be in this space. I think some other trends to call out are that we've seen kind of the growing trade gap between the U.S. and Mexico. And so for those, within the industry or within the cross-border industry, there is this deficit that exists where the U.S. is importing a lot more than they are exporting to Mexico. And so, that has implications from a capacity standpoint. But we've seen that gap rise a little bit. And so I think it'll be interesting, within the next year or 2 years as the negotiations for the new USMCA go into place, if the goal is to kind of continue to shrink that trade deficit. So that's something that we've seen in terms of how the volumes have shifted. And then I think, like the types of volumes, a lot of the manufacturing that was coming from China that was nearshore to Mexico, a lot of that is high-end manufacturing. And so we know the automotive industry within cross-border has been around for quite some time, but I think we'll see continued investment in automotive and semiconductors, equipment, computer chips, and so again, some of this high-end manufacturing that was happening in China.
I'm curious if because the automotive industry is a very interesting kind of use case for this, where they have really kind of taken the North America, like the North American supply chain, and really kind of made that into what they do for automotive. Because you'll have parts made here, you'll have stuff assembled, like you might have parts made in Mexico, you'll have stuff assembled in the US, but then you're also having parts and vehicles assembled and made in Canada as well. And like it's so interconnected between the two that I almost kind of makes me wonder that, because there is the rise of nearshoring and it does take time to get those investments done and built and like approved, and we just can't make an entire manufacturing city appear overnight. So I'm curious if there's any other industries that would kind of almost take that automotive approach to say like, oh, we're going to really use the full ability of North America to just be able to move things kind of between the countries here. I'm just that kind of almost made me wonder, like, I wonder if there's any other industry that like might kind of more or less steal that idea.
Yeah, I think it'll depend on like USMCA and in what
Yeah.
industries are kind of really protected by that. But I think you made such a good point in that when people are talking about volatility in the long term, these supply chains are so integrated, and
Yeah.
I think we'll continue to see. Connectivity between all of the countries within the USMCA. So I think it could very well apply to other industries within cross border, but automotive is definitely the one that has had the leg up.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious after the negotiations finish for the new USMCA. I think we'll probably be able to see whatever industry is trying to kind of take that same approach. But I guess we'll have to wait, what, like 2 years to figure that out. So
Yeah,
that being said, over the obviously in 2 years or so, that's when the new USMCA will come into effect, and that could change a lot of things. But we're dealing with that in 2 years, so so I'm thinking a year out, or what does that look like? Do you see it continuing to grow? Do you see anything? What do you see anything really changing of significance in the cross-border landscape changing in the next year? Or do you think it's just going to kind of be a steady increase in volumes, and then we'll have to wait and see what happens with the USMCA?
I think steady increase in volumes, and there's been, equal investments in infrastructure. I think the last time we talked about the technology piece and really working to get cross border. I think we said into like the 21st century, right? So I think we'll continue to see those investments, and hopefully they're enough to manage the influx in volumes. And I think the other component is the market, right? I think for the most part it's been a very soft market the last few years, and so if all these volumes are coming on at the time when also we're kind of going into an inflationary market, I think will have an impact on capacity. So we'll see. I think that would be kind of my take in the next year and a half.
I think that's a pretty solid take because I think everything is still, everyone's kind of getting all the, because I know it felt like last year, like all throughout the year, everyone was announcing setting up an operation, setting up manufacturing, setting up an office, setting up something in just all across Mexico. And that obviously takes time. So now that that has been kind of, we made that announcement last year and everything's starting to come back online, we're going to see all those projects kind of come to fruition, if you will, and start having that demand for cross border. I'm just very curious on what that's going to do to like you said, that deficit of the imports versus the exports, because you don't want to just get a bunch of trucks on the U.S. side and have them not have any freight to move them back to the other side. So I'm just curious about what that's going to look like, but I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. So so when it comes to, obviously Arrive is in a really unique position because you guys have offices in, you have offices in Canada, the US, and Mexico. So you guys really have said, we got you in North America. But when it comes to science, maybe some of those other brokerages that are thinking about developing a cross-border solution or maybe setting up an office in Canada or Mexico in addition to their US based offices, what are some of those kind of capacity plans and then also some of those redundancy cases that you need to have on, like, kind of have prepared for when you set up these cross-border moves, and then so that way you're not kind of caught up in any of those regional disruptions that happen?
Yeah, I think, disruption is the name of the game. It's not, if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And I think within cross border, it's really trying to shift to be more proactive in planning. And so I think, talking to your customer base and understanding as maybe there's more investments in, let's say, different like crossing cities, what are some like alternate routes that we can put into place should there be a disruption at a border that they're crossing through. I think too, we talked about technology, and for brokers who are investing in the technology, we're getting a lot of insight into a customer's operation that sometimes they do not have this bird's eye view, especially when it comes to the border, right? I think the opportunity is where the complexity is at, and that's at the border. And so at least on our side, what we're really trying to do with our technology is make sure that we're getting those insights to our customer base. And with five to seven parties involved in a cross-border shipment, there's a lot, and you need to understand who has ownership over each part of the process. And so if you're able to really scale and develop that technology, you're able to really plan for some of these disruptions ahead of time, knowing where a customer's vulnerability is by utilizing that data and saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of delays that are coming from your customs broker and generating documentation paperwork. And so those are the items that we're continuing to consult on with our customer base, and that's how you add value as a broker, is to be able to again take this bird's eye view, gather the data, and put it in front of their customers so that when they are planning, they're able to really attack the most vulnerable parts of their operation. Because if there is some type of disruption, it's only going to exacerbate it.
1,000%. And I'm really glad you brought up that technology aspect because that's something that we really haven't had. Like you said, there's that huge kind of technological evolution and growth happening in Mexico and with cross-border freight, because for the longest time it was literally just like your shipment went across the border and you just hoped that it got there, and like someone would call you and say like, oh yeah, it delivered, just because there was that technology limiting factor. And I'm really happy that that has kind of been modernized and brought up into the way that we can effectively integrate. So that way, in theory, you could have a shipment start in Canada and then end all the way in Mexico, or vice versa, and you could maintain visibility of it the entire time. Which I it's kind of almost when you think about it, it's like, why is that visibility taken us so long to get to? But obviously, like it's different regulations and different. It's like a whole other beast. But it is nice that like there are those tools that are coming that it can provide those insights and everything like that because that's something that I think a lot of shippers were missing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think from like a border perspective, like the documentation, right? There's still physical documentation that gets, passed from one party to the other. The complemento cartaporte layout gets passed it's sent so that the carrier can generate the cartaporte so that we can generate crossing documents. And so there's just so much opportunity. It's like ripe for investment in technology to be able to standardize these processes and really drive that efficiency. And then, you had mentioned like Canada and Canada movements being really streamlined. I know there's been discussions about, the custom systems and really working to align and potentially into the future operate, out of the same one. And so I think there's a lot of complexity to be solved for, which is also the exciting piece.
I guess because I think the CCP was just kind of getting rolling last time we were talking. Has that kind of been because I know they like delayed it and delayed it to make sure that they could get people like trialing it and doing stuff like that. Has that kind of been have you guys seen any hiccups as a result of that now that we're like a couple months, like now that we're like, what, 6 months to almost a year in?
No, I think that the industry is fully, adapted, acclimated. Because of that slow rollout, it really gave the industry the time to put the processes in place to manage it. And I think what we've seen too is that with the CCP or the Carta Porte, we're able to get the crossing documents and everything needed and standardized. So I think that there have definitely been some administrative burdens, but at the same time, I think there's been some value add as well.
So I guess when it comes to looking at the industry as like a whole, what are there any areas that you think people aren't necessarily taking advantage of, whether that's in regards to trade hubs or nearshoring, or what kind of opportunities are you seeing people just kind of leave on the table?
I think we'll see continued or an opportunity is just additional crossing points, right? You hear about the Laredos, El Pasos, Tijuana, but as volumes increase, I think that we're going to need to look into different ways to optimize routes. And like I mentioned, also, what are some of these contingency plans if there's a bottleneck at the border? And so I think. That's definitely an area is starting to see more movements across different border crossings, Colombia, Eagle Pass, Nogales, etc.
I think that the border crossings is it's going to come up a lot more because obviously there's like better border crossings or ones that people like to prefer because of whatever reason. Maybe it moves faster or they just have a better relationship with some of the people that work there if they're crossing daily. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting component that people are going to have to kind of deal with, especially if it's something that they're not familiar with, is that, sometimes they get backed up for a couple hours and there's nothing you can really do about it. And at some point in time, you're going to have those kind of that analysis of like, okay, well, if Laredo's really busy, is it worth driving like an hour out of my way to go to one that's less busy? Or is it worth sitting potentially for 2 or 3 hours to not go so far out of route? So I think that that's something that is a challenge that I think a lot of people kind of forget about when they're coming up with those contingency plans and kind of first jumping into the cross border situation. But obviously, you guys have more than crushed that when you are just like, yeah, we just happen to have our Mexico office and we happen to be doing things very well. So since the last time we talked, you guys had just opened the Mexico office. What kind of growth have you guys seen internally at Arrive? Have you been able to kind of what kind of growth have you guys seen?
Yeah, I think, it was about a year ago when we chatted. We were circling on that 100 mark. As of last month, you hit over 200 employees. We have classes every single month of 10 to 15 employees. So by the end of the year, we'll be closer to that 250 mark. And those are the numbers in terms of headcount. But I think that this office has matured a lot in terms of talent, in terms of experience. We talked last time about our career pathing, and our focus on retention. Retention is a huge focal point. Our people are of utmost importance at Arrive, and to be able to bring on top talent, retain them, that is what really creates a high performing culture. And so we've seen over the course of the last year is these teams grow, additional leadership positions. And I think what sets us apart is that we continue to be extremely integrated with the US. So our exec team talks to every single new hire that comes into this office. We have leadership, come down and visit on a normal cadence, because bridging those gaps is extremely important. And so we have teams that support the US funnel, and then through our career pathing, they're able to gain the skills to move to cross border. And so a lot of our employees, they see Arrive as a long-term career path. And that is what I think has allowed us to really scale successfully at this rate. So Guadalajara is Arrive's fastest growing office, and we're really proud to say so.
I think that's such an amazing feat because, I mean, coming from a brokerage world, you understand how quickly that turnover can be. And you can bring all of these, like if you bring in a class of 20 people and then maybe only like 40% of them stick around, and you're just having that giant revolving door. But the fact that you guys have consistently been able to implement and maintain that headcount, it just, you guys found a secret sauce down there somewhere. And I guess if people want your secret sauce, they're going to have to come down to visit you guys and see how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, Mexico has solid talent, and I think Arrive has been really diligent about that cultural awareness, and knowing that working internationally means having that understanding from a cultural perspective, and knowing that that is really a strength of the organization. And then also being here, I know having boots on the ground, it's a huge advantage as well for our customers, our carriers, being on site and really leveraging local talent and being able to build those relationships locally as well. So it really is being able to manage that cultural component and making sure that we're utilizing that to our advantage.
1,000%. Because then you also have, like, you're in the community, you have a pulse on what's going on. And that way it's like, oh, if you just need me to pop over really quick to help you work through something, you're there, you can do it, instead of like, well, let me send a team down and in like 3 days we can actually address this. Whereas you guys are like, we're right here. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's leveraging, your local subject matter experts, your talent on the ground, and continuing to build those bridges. And I think I've seen the organization, really embrace this office and really, look to develop relationships on both sides of the border. So that's been really awesome to see in Arrive's expansion internationally.
I mean, everybody knows I'm a sucker for a good Arrive logistics win. So that being said, we have one more question for you today, and that is, if you could build a house out of any food, what would you choose?
I would choose pasta. I
Yes.
choose pasta because I feel like there's a lot of different types of pasta. So it's
Hmm.
like thinking like lasagna, you could like use that to build up the walls. It's sturdy. I mean, maybe some concerns if repeatedly gets wet, but I still think long shelf life, right? It's not going to like mold, like it'll protect me for a
Exactly.
while. And then I think that there's, the different types of pasta, you could also kind of get ornamental. You could start decorating and it doesn't have to like be an ugly
Yeah.
house of pasta. So I thought it was practical and there could be like an aesthetic like level to it.
Because you could have your like lasagna sheet walls, and then you could have like the orchette pieces on
Mhm.
it, and then like maybe some orzo around it or something like that. Oh, those
Yeah.
corkscrew you could turn into like lights. I love
Yeah.
where your head's at. I love this
Maybe
so much.
like doorknobs. I feel like that would be pretty good. So
Yeah, I love this.
awesome.
This is 10s across the board. All right. Jess, if anyone has maybe the perfect floor plan for a pasta house, or if they have any questions about kind of how to improve or get started with their cross border freight, where can they find you outside the show?
You guys can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, shoot me a message. I'm available.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mary. Always a pleasure.
You can find Check Call the Podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
Yeah.